We begin with breaking news, of course, as war unfolds in Ukraine.
Pregnant women were among those who were helped out of the building. Ukraine called it a war crime.
Putin and Lukashenko are dictators, are killers, as we've seen right now. They don't support democracies. They don't provide any political freedom in countries. They threaten not only Belarus or Ukraine, they threaten the whole world.
То ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не столкнулись.
The Belarusian regime is now an ally of the Russian regime.
Беларусь и Россия вынуждены искать адекватные способы отражения возможного.
But we didn't choose Lukashenko.
Lukashenko, who's ruled this country with an iron fist.
And the majority of people do not support this ally between Russia and Belarus.
Online vigilantes are joining the fight against Russia.
Cyber Partisans are a highly organized hacktivist group that is trying to overthrow the illegitimate dictatorship regime in Belarus. They're also attacking now military troops that try to be brought to the border of Ukraine. Information is power. Without independent Ukraine, there is no chance for Belarus. My name is Juliana, and I'm the spokesperson for Cyber Partisans. Cyber Partisans has been called one of the most successful hacktivist groups ever existing. There are around 30 members. Since the war began in Ukraine, 5 more people joined. So none of them are professional hackers, but they learned everything on the go, from tutorials, videos, also just by doing hacks. One of our recent targets was Belarusian railway system.
A group calling themselves the Belarusian Cyber Partisans has hacked into Belarus's national railway network in an attempt to disrupt the buildup of these Russian vehicles and troops in their country.
The goal was to affect the Russian military troops coming to Belarus and then going through Belarus to the northern border with Ukraine, and also trying to help remove Russian military troops that now occupy Belarus and pulling Belarus into war with Ukraine.
In a massive show of force not seen since the Cold War, 30,000 Russian troops now stationed in Belarus.
The fear of troops in Belarus coming down toward Kyiv in a pincer move, it's surrounding Kyiv. U.S. officials I talked to are very worried about that.
A lot of people actually ask me, why is it efficient? Why would it affect Russian military troops?
Russia's military is able to rely heavily on the rail network. It was trains that moved the troops, tanks, and trucks to and from Yena, into Kursk, and across the Bryansk and Smolensk oblasts.
Tanks cannot be transported by planes. Heavy artillery cannot be transported by planes, so they do need to use these trains. Cyber Partisans attack the internal network of the railway systems, as well as equipment, software, and any databases that are associated with the railway systems. They run many softwares on Windows XP, which is like a really old program and it can be easily attacked. So that was another reason for them to show how Lukashenko's regime disregards the security of the key infrastructure in Belarus.
The operation to disrupt the railway seems to have worked, or at least to some extent. The railway company was forced to issue a press release stating that, for technical reasons, some services like electronic travel documents have been disrupted.
Many trains were delayed. 90% of internal networks. We hope that this time of slowing down the movement of Russian forces will help Ukrainians to regroup, to resist the attack from the Belarusian border, and we're trying to buy some time, in a sense. Another important aspect of our work is exposing human rights abuses.
Massive peaceful protests have gripped Belarus, calling for an end to what's known as Europe's last dictatorship.
When the protests started in 2020 after the presidential elections in Belarus, where Lukashenko did not win the elections, people went to protest, not only in the capital of Belarus, Minsk, but in smaller towns and villages all over the whole Belarus. But they were brutally suppressed.
The people who demonstrated in the early days were detained by the thousands, and some disappeared or were found dead.
Cyber partisans hacked the Minister of Interior Affairs. They also got access to the wiretapped conversations between high-level top officials and politicians, including the police officers that commit crimes, and confirmed that they did some attacks on peaceful protesters.
Всех доставила в райотдел, во внутренний двор, блядь, все лежа, блядь, все должны прочувствовать. Задержание, сразу говорю, это мой приказ, должны быть, блядь, жесткими.
It shows how policemen were discussing how they beat up a woman for just honking during protests.
Открываю дверь, нахуй, за волосы вытянул с машины, блядь. Это самое, нахуй дал, блядь, ОМОНовцам. Говорю, как начал орать там, блядь.
They're also discussing how inhuman conditions they need to create for these protesters, peaceful protesters in prison.
Какие условия содержания?
В одиночной камере, значит, самые херовые матрасы, нерваные там, блядь, вшивые.
They also got access to the recordings of people singing in prisons, which was actually very inspiring for many Belarusian people, listening to how people are still trying to resist even though they're locked in prison. And one of the reasons it was so easy to hack these systems is because Lukashenko prefers loyalism over professionalism. They didn't secure the systems, so as much as people admire the work of cyber partisans, we should also state that it was not that hard to hack because Lukashenko's regime disregarded simple cybersecurity practices. Cyber partisans, including myself, are now working with many investigative organizations that we help by providing information on all these human rights abuses, trying to build a case that will be in the future used against the regime. And I think that's how we can see many people in other regions can fight the dictatorship regimes by using IT technologies, by using their brains, by using creativity in targeting the regime's people. So that's what cyber partisans kind of doing right now. Yes, it's dangerous, but you gotta do what you gotta do.